You're watching Reality Check. Tonight, the latest twist in India's telecom game of phones. An SOS letter written by Kumar Mangalam Birla, chairman of the cash-strapped Vodafone Idea, to the government. A letter which lays bare the underlying crisis in India's telecom sector, once made up of dozens of players, now battling to stop turning into a two-horse race. In it, Mr Birla says he's willing to transfer his group's entire stake in Vodafone Idea, India's third largest telecom operator, to the government. The letter to Cabinet Secretary Rajiv Gauba was written in June and has only now emerged in the public domain, and says, despite all his efforts, the financials of Vodafone Idea have sharply deteriorated. Foreign investors are hesitating in making investments. Investors unwilling to put money without clarity. Investors want to see a clear government intent on a three-player market. Without support, Voda Idea is heading to an irretrievable point of collapse. He says, I'm more than willing to hand over my stake in the company to any government entity that can keep the company as a going concern. What is it, according to the letter, that investors want clarity on from the government? First, clarity on what are called payouts to the government, the adjusted gross revenue or the AGR question. Also, adequate moratorium on spectrum payments and a floor price for telecom. Vodafone has since lost an estimated 2,700 crores in market value. Now, the context to all this is this: India's once booming market is now just down to three private players: Jio, Airtel and Vodafone. The factors are many, too many to list here, but in effect, huge debt, what they believe are overpriced fees for license and spectrum, and the entry of Jio with its aggressive pricing and expansion. Just look at these numbers to show you Jio's rapid rise as a new entrant. It's got currently the highest subscriber base, according to Statista figures, of 41 crore subscribers. Airtel next with 34 crores. Vodafone Idea has slipped to 28 crores. And the two state-run telecom agencies are now at fourth place with about 13 crores. A crucial tipping point came in 2019 when the government won a court battle to get telecom players to pay close to 1.7 lakh crores in overdue fees and penalties, in which Vodafone was the worst hit when it comes to these AGR or gross revenue estimates. As per the Supreme Court order, the dues, Vodafone Idea, rupees 58,000 crores, of which they've paid about 8,000 crores. Bharti Airtel, 44,000 crores. They've already paid close to 18,000 crores, almost half. The Tatas, about 17,000 crores, paid about 4,200 crores. And Jio, the least hit, with just about a 71 crore payout. All of this has aggravated Vodafone's crisis. Just look at the overall profit versus loss chart now. Vodafone from 2016-17, from a loss of 400 crores, is 74,000 crore loss. Bharti Airtel, from a profit of 4,200 crores, is down to a 31,000 crore loss. Jio actually is the only profitable company, which is now from minus 34 crores to 5,600 crores plus. Vodafone Idea, of course, merged in 2018, so some figures may not be comparable. All right, let's go across to panel. We've got Sanjay Kapoor with us, former CEO of Airtel. Always great to have him on. We have with us Brijendra K. Singhal, former CMD of VSNL. And also we have with us Mukesh Bhutani, who's founder and MD BMR Legal, tax expert. Good to see you, Mukesh Bhutani. Okay, let me just ask you, Sanjay Kapoor, as you are watching this unfold, is this almost like a train wreck that you saw, that we knew was coming? And what is this Kumar Birla letter really telling you about what is going on with what was once India's dream story, telecom?
So, very good evening, Srinivasan and the viewers. In my parlance, the letter submitted by Mr. Birla is metaphoric and symbolic in nature. And it basically talks about two glaring issues. One is clearly about the whole telecom industry, and the telecom industry slipping from a healthy oligopoly to a duopoly, which is not a preferred structure in any part of the world. The world has tried and tested all structures, and finally what has really gained acceptance in most parts of the world is a healthy oligopoly. The second issue that he is pointing towards is the survival of his own company. And how does he carry on with the current balance sheet and the amounts that he owes to the exchequers and also to banks and other lenders.
Right.
So I think that all is, coming together in that letter, and he's asking for help.
Yes.
And the difficulty in what he's asking for is that whether you look at the bailout with his current situation or you look at his future sustenance in the industry, both are almost outside the ambit of what he can do. There is a bit he can do,
Sure.
but most of it is dependent on the government. And the government needs to take calls and probably bail out, which is a very, very difficult situation.
No, but let me ask you this, Sanjay Kapoor, that looking at the first part of what you said, that his letter is a metaphor for the snapshot of our telecom industry, which, as you rightly said, nobody wants a duopoly. I think even the government says at least it should be a three-way play. Issues are complex and historic, so I'm going to ask you to summarize it in slightly simple terms for our viewer. But what has brought us to this point? I mean, somewhere along the line, do you believe that not just, I mean, we're not blaming any one government, but there has just been over-regulation, too much heavy taxation, favoritism, all that has led us here? How would you see it?
So, Srinivasan, despite the industry's complexity, the problem can be very simply explained. As far as the revenues of the industry are concerned, they are plagued by their own woes of charging probably the least prices in the world. And at these prices, it doesn't stack up. And at these ARPUs of $2 per customer, it doesn't stack up to make a viable case where technology actually needs a change every 4 years, 5 years now. It's not a 10-year change anymore.
Right. So it's just too cheap. The rates, telecom rates in India are, you're saying, just
just not tenable. That is on the revenue side. On the cost side, we have the most expensive raw material that's required to provide telecom services, which is spectrum.
Right.
The spectrum is priced 6, 7, 8 times higher than any part of the world. And therefore, when the raw material is so expensive, how do you sell it so cheap? And finally, all the levies, 30% of what you earn in some form or the other goes to the government of India, right? Whether it's the revenue share or it's the SUC, world over, when there are market discovered prices on the raw material, which is spectrum, then the governments generally make administrative charges, which are basically to carry on and support the telecom industry. And last but not the least, the court cases which result into a payment of AGR is actually a problem with the definition of AGR. AGR for a company that provides telecom services need to be on the services that originate from the spectrum and the infrastructure of telecom and the services that they provide.
Right.
And not all other incomes that accrue to the telecom company.
Okay. So
this whole battle complexes the whole deal.
Right. We actually have a quick graphic to explain what AGR is. We'll put that on the screen for those who may not know, but this is adjusted gross revenue, which the government says includes, as we just heard Sanjay Kapoor say, even non-core aspects of the telecom business. Even that has to be, in a sense, considered and taxed. Telecom operators said that's not the case, but they lost in the court, and that's why they've ended up having to pay these huge amounts to the government. But Brajendra Singhal, what do you make of Kumar Birla's SOS? And in that sense, as far as the government side is concerned, because as you said, the rates are also very low. We just said that, so that's on the telecom players. But the government.
Good evening.
Has that also contributed? Has that also contributed to the crisis? Yes, go ahead, Mr. Singhal. Mr. Singhal?
Good evening.
Yes, go ahead. Yes, Mr. Singhal.
My take is slightly different. Good evening.
Yes.
You see, I think the AGR policy in itself is flawed. As Mr. Kapoor mentioned, that 30% of the AGR or the revenues are going into the government kitty. I call it taxing the success of the industry in perpetuity. You see, if they make more money, 30% of that is going into the government kitty. It's a very flawed approach of AGR calculation, which we have in the country. The best approach, scientific approach, should be that you should have revenue utilization. Fix a date on which the government can say, on this date, I made so much of revenue from telecom sector, and then inflation and index it, and have
Okay, we're getting a little technical now, Mr. Singhal.
Of another padding, so that the government is always in a position.
Okay, Mr. Singhal, we're getting a little technical. Also, we're having some problems with your line. We'll just get that fixed in just a second.
I think
I'll come back to you. Let me just go to Sunil Alag if I can. Sunil Alag, just not getting into too much technical nitty-gritties, but overall, is it concerning when you have a situation in this country that a senior business tycoon like Kumar Birla is writing to the government, says, just take over my company? That's how bad it is with where we're heading with telecom, from where we were to now this.
You're so right, because ultimately Mr. Birla has read with and as far as the consumer is concerned, see, the because
okay, Sunil Alag, we'll come. Sunil Alag, there's some signal issues. Ironically, we are having a conversation on telecom, and we're having signal problems with our panelists. That's a bit of a metaphor for how things are. But we'll come back to all of you. Not to worry. Let me try to see if Mahesh Uppal, we can get him on a better signal. Mahesh Uppal, the same question to you. This somewhat dramatic SOS from Kumar Birla. Is this kind of, we knew the company was in trouble. They've been trying to get investors. They've been trying to sell stake. No one is buying. So now he's just saying, government take over. Is that the only way out?
Yes. I do believe that, sorry, there's a bit of an echo, but let me try. Yeah. Sorry. Okay, I do believe that there is really not much of a chance for Vodafone to survive without government intervention. Yeah, the issues have already been clarified by Sanjay Kapoor, as well as in your own graphics. The challenge really is that almost all other avenues have been exhausted. The TRAI has been approached for certain things. The courts have been approached, and both of them have clearly not managed to assist Vodafone. And in a fair discussion, we must also concede that Vodafone has lost, not because there was any major discrimination against it. It is lost because, in a manner of speaking, it miscalculated. And of course, it's also fair to say that the government's own dealing of the AGR revenue, as Sanjay Kapoor also pointed out, is very, very problematic. But given what the issues were, given what the licenses companies have signed on to, I don't think the courts had much of a choice. And now it is for the government to actually come and say that, look, we believe that a duopoly in telecom sector is not a good idea, and we need to do something about this. And my fear is that the normal option of providing subsidies or even foregoing revenues may be a tricky one, because recall that this is not something that the other companies are wanting. To make a special case out of Vodafone may be difficult.
I don't think Mahesh Uppal can hear me. Mahesh Uppal, can you hear me?
Earlier last month.
Okay. Mahesh Uppal, if you can hear me, what I'm trying to ask you is that, in simple terms, should the government take over? Let me actually go across to Mukesh Bhutani. Mukesh Bhutani, I mean, this entire question of very punitive AGR revenues, all that. But at the end of the day, you think that the government really now, I mean, there's no choice. They have to take over Vodafone if they, they don't want to have a duopoly, and no one else is interested. No other private foreign investor, as Mr. Birla put it in his letter, is interested.
Well, there are two aspects. Number one, practically, will the government take over? And secondly, what's the reason that has brought Vodafone Idea to this situation? And last but not the least, what's the situation with the telecom industry in India? I don't think it makes any sense for the government to take over. It would be a reverse of privatization. The government has been working hard in the last 2 decades to get out of the business of providing telecom services. Specifically, the government's track record in running BSNL and MTNL is there in front of us. So I don't know what the government is going to do to this asset, even if it was supposed to practically take over. So in my view, that's
a good point.
Nationalization or reverse of privatization.
That's a good point. Can I just bring in Sanjay Kapoor on that? Sanjay Kapoor, as we just heard Mukesh Bhutani say, that given where we are with the state-run telecom companies, can there really be some kind of entity which is government-run now, some sort of Vodafone Idea, MTNL, BSNL kind of mishmash? Will that work?
Srinivasan, my ideas on this are absolutely black and white. There's no shade of gray in my mind. Two wrongs don't make a right. Right? If you try to club BSNL and Vodafone Idea, you will land up with such a catastrophic sort of a situation. You will not know how to deal with it. Forget the hard facts that BSNL and MTNL don't have worthy customers to lend any value to the merger of sorts. But culturally, to manage a company which has got an Indian company, a global company, and a public sector all rolled into one, I don't know who's got the wherewithal to really turn around something like that. And especially when they are already in the red, they are not in the pink of health. BSNL is still a 2G company. They've not even moved to 3G. They have more than 100,000 employees. How do you deal with that situation? I think that's absolutely absolutely a ridiculous thought.
No, hold on. Then what's the end game as far as Kumar Birla and this whole Vodafone Idea is concerned? What's the end game then? If government doesn't,
So Srinivasan, the problem is that you all get into business not to survive but to thrive, right? And the problem is that any permutation combination on VIL today only talks about survival. And if you are standing still in water, you'll go down. Right? So I don't see anything that can happen immediately unless and until the government really is willing to write off a few dues from them, or give them really a long rope to say they will pay over a very long period in time. Unless and until that happens, and the future of the business where AGR come down, SUC sunsets, spectrum prices become cheaper than what they are today, and all that happens, only then a future is possible, probably over 10 years, 12 years, for them to pay back what they have to pay back. But if you look at the short-term survival, they will go down.
Right. But many of the things that you're saying, I don't know if that's even possible, because as you said, the timelines for paying back the dues has been fixed by the Supreme Court. The government actually said 20 years. The Supreme Court said, no, you have to do it in 10 years. And, reducing spectrum prices and all that, especially when you have a pandemic year, government revenues hit, we'll have to see. But let me just try Mr. Singhal again. Mr. Singhal, if you can hear me clearly.
Yes, please.
But what do you make of it? Because, at the end of the day, this movement from an oligopoly to a duopoly has also been at the cost of VSNL and MTNL. You've been associated with those companies. How would you, because there's a whole argument, it's become a bit political, that these companies were deliberately run to the ground to benefit, corporates.
You see, if you ask my honest opinion, merging it with BSNL, MTNL is a non-starter, because you are merging one sinking entity with another, let's say, sort of thinking entity. So that's a non-starter. There are two loss-making companies. Merger of those two will not at all succeed. It will be an early demise for both of them.
But were these companies, my question, Mr. Singhal, was slightly different. Were these companies almost deliberately gutted by the government, as some allege?
Mr. Srinivasan, I would agree that it has been done deliberately. And let me just give you one simple example. I want to ask the government, does Mr. Sunil Bharti Mittal or Reliance Jio come to them for every permission? No, they are not governed at all. The plank of this government was minimum government, maximum governance. And there is nothing of that in the last 7 years. The PSUs are being allowed to grind to a halt. So the demise of BSNL and MTNL is a deliberate to kill them. And there is no question of their revival unless some sort of professional management is brought.
Okay, that's quite strong.
There's no chance.
Right, that's strong words from you. Let me ask Mukesh Bhutani though.
Clear.
Okay, Mukesh Bhutani, as we sort of wind down for time, so give us a sense, again, just looking into the crystal ball, if you have a not great scenario where you are heading for a duopoly, what is that going to mean in simple terms for customers particularly?
I think the government had an opportunity 22 months back after the October 2019 decision to intervene. Because
you're talking of the Supreme Court, you're talking of
that's right.
The Supreme Court verdict on the revenues, on AGR, right?
Parliament has the right to intervene, including overriding a Supreme Court decision. Now, be it the way it is, considerable damage has been caused in the last 20 months. I think there is still an opportunity. All you require is a legislative move. The legislative move has to be innovative. It could be anything. It could be, coming out with the original scheme of, 20 years. It could be setting off the dues that the telecom companies, some of them may be interested in the 5G. So you can set off the 5G license dues. You can considerably relook at the licensing regime under 5G. Vodafone has a tax liability that the government is talking about recovering. You can consider, of course, it has won in an international arbitration, but the government insists that that arbitration does not apply to them. It can look at setting off that liability. So I think it requires a very urgent legislative intervention because it is not just about Vodafone. It is about the duopoly situation that everyone talk about, which is not good for any of the stakeholders, not good for the consumer.
So again, like Sanjay Kapoor, you're listing out steps the government can take to respond. At the moment, by the way, we don't know what the government's response was to this letter, Mr. Birla's letter. We've tried to reach out to them. There's no clarity yet. Aditya Birla Group also not very clear about, or at least at the level of which one was in touch with them, they weren't very clear what happened to the letter. But just last question to you, Sanjay Kapoor. Paint a picture for us of India where there'll just be two telecom companies. What is that actually going to mean to the ARM customer?
So, Srinivasan, I'll try to put it very simply.
Yes.
First of all, the entire ecosystem of telecom, its economics have been now designed for an oligopoly. The tower sharing, the fiber, the content providers, the device manufacturers, the storage guys, security guys, they've all designed their business models considering there'll be 4 guys in the market. If tomorrow there are no 4 guys in the market, there are 2 guys in the market, then the cost has to be borne by the 2 remaining guys, which means those costs will get passed on to the consumer, right? Therefore, it is inflationary in nature for 2 in a duopoly to survive. That's on the cost side. On the service and quality of service side, what is the pressure on 2 guys not to have a cozy duopoly and get away with very mediocre services for the customer because customer has nowhere to go? When you are 2 guys left, it is not seen anywhere in the world that the market will get divided 80-20. The market will virtually get divided 50-50, 45-55. And India was a duopoly at a point in time in every circle, right? We've gone through that whole circle. Now, if that happens, the consumer is going to be on the raw end of the stick as far as the service is concerned and as far as the prices are concerned. He's left with no choice. And we have enough parts of the world where they reached a duopoly and then the government intervened to bring in a couple of players more in the market because it was a disaster for the ecosystem.
Which is how we started this journey. Government intervened, made sure that we had many players, but now it's like the wheel is coming full circle. Anyway, fingers crossed, let's see how it plays out. But pleasure to have all of you on the show. Thank you very much indeed, gentlemen, for joining me, and also for those of you watching. Good night.